The first sound that night was not a voice, not even a sigh. It was the clean, metallic note of a fork falling against a porcelain plate. A small, delicate sound. But in that moment, it felt loud enough to split the room in two. No one spoke after it. The roast chicken was perfectly golden, the salad untouched, the wine half poured and already losing its chill. Chloe sat opposite me, her posture too straight to be casual. Liam sat beside her, phone face down on the table, pretending he did not feel the tension building in the air like static before a storm. This was supposed to be a Sunday family dinner, the kind I once dreamed of having every week. Now, it felt like an appointment everyone was waiting to end. Chloe's voice finally broke the silence. "You know," she began, her tone smooth, practiced. "The Hendersons are visiting next weekend. I think we should prepare the house properly this time. Maybe make sure everything looks appropriate." Her eyes shifted to me for the briefest moment before landing back on Liam. "Your mother's cottage," she added, "is very sweet, but it might be distracting. You know how they are. They have a place in Manhattan. They host private wine pairings and charity brunches. I just want them to see us as equals." Equals. The word sat on the table like another piece of silverware, gleaming and cold. Liam cleared his throat. "Chloe, it's fine. Mom has been here forever." Chloe smiled faintly. "Exactly. Forever. Maybe it is time we help her find something more comfortable. There are really good senior communities nearby. I saw one with a greenhouse and yoga classes. She would love that." I kept my hands folded in my lap. The light above the table caught the faint veins on my wrists, tiny rivers running under skin that used to be steady enough to draw blueprints and paint walls. When my husband and I first bought this land, there was nothing here but trees and water. We cleared it together, built our first home with borrowed hands and stubborn hope. I thought I would grow old here, surrounded by family. I never imagined I would be told I was clutter. Chloe's tone softened, like a nurse offering medicine. "It is not that we do not want you here, Zaria. We just think you deserve more care, you know? People your age need community, activities, safety. This place is big. It gets lonely. Lonely." If she knew how many nights I had sat awake, listening to their laughter from the main house, she would not have used that word. Liam looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. His were the same gray-blue as his father's, but emptier somehow. "Mom, maybe Chloe's right. You should think about it. It could be good for you." I smiled because it was the only weapon left to me. "Thank you for thinking of me," I said quietly. Chloe exhaled, relieved. "Wonderful. We can look at options next week. And don't worry, we'll help with the fees." The way she said help sounded like she was buying back guilt in small installments. Dinner resumed in silence. The knife scraped against plates. The clock ticked too loud. I noticed the table runner, the one I had embroidered years ago, now replaced by something from a designer store. Even the curtains were different, white and sterile, without the tiny hand-stitched flowers I once added during long winters. When the plates were cleared, Chloe stood and said, "I'll pack you some leftovers, Zaria. The chicken turned out really nice tonight." She didn't wait for me to answer. She was already scraping food into containers, humming an upbeat tune under her breath. Liam scrolled through his phone again. I stood up slowly. The wooden chair made a soft creak as I moved, a sound more honest than any of their words. "Thank you," I said again. Dinner was lovely. I walked out before anyone thought to stop me. The hallway smelled of new paint and candles. Chloe's candles, the expensive kind that come in stone jars and promise serenity. I remembered the old scent of this place, when it was still mine. Rosemary from the garden, lemon polish on the banister, the faint musk of soil that never quite washed off my hands. Outside, the night was cold and clear. The path to my cottage glimmered under the porch light. I had laid those stones myself, one by one, when Liam was still a boy and liked to follow me around barefoot. I used to tell him each stone was a promise that we would always find our way home. Now, it led away from the only home I had left. The garden was half asleep, lavender bushes bent under the wind, the faint smell of wet earth clinging to the air. I touched a branch as I passed. My fingers came away scented with memory. Inside my cottage, the air was still warm from the small heater near the window. The kettle waited on the stove, the same one my husband bought for me the year we first moved here. Its handle was cracked but loyal. I boiled water, poured tea into my chipped porcelain cup, and sat by the window facing the main house. Through the glass, I could see the glow of their living room, soft and golden, like a world that no longer had a place for me. I took a sip. The tea burned my tongue, but I did not flinch. Somewhere inside the big house, Chloe laughed, a bright, practiced sound. Liam's voice followed, low and indistinct. Their silhouettes passed by the window, tall and certain. I sat in silence, counting the distance between us, one breath at a time. When the lights finally dimmed and the laughter faded, I whispered to the dark, "You can keep the house." Then I added, quietly, "But not the ground beneath it." Morning arrived with fog rolling off the lake like pale smoke. The world outside my window looked like it was holding its breath. I made tea again, this time without sugar. I had long stopped pretending sweetness could fix anything. As the kettle whistled, I watched a squirrel dart across the path that connected my cottage to the main house. It used to be just a few steps through the garden, now it felt like a border. Chloe's car was already gone when I stepped outside. She always left early for her studio job in town. Liam was probably still asleep. He worked from home now, in that big glass office he built where my old apple tree once stood. The air carried the faint smell of burnt toast. I smiled. He still forgot to lower the setting on the toaster, just like when he was a teenager. For a moment, the memory felt warm. Then I remembered that he no longer laughed when I teased him about it. I walked through the garden, touching the lavender, the sage, the small patch of mint that refused to die no matter how many times Chloe's landscaper trimmed it. My garden had always been stubborn like that. At the edge of the path stood a new sign. I hadn't seen it before. Private area, do not enter. The words were printed in clean white letters on black wood. It faced my cottage directly. For a second I could not move. Then I laughed softly. Not bitterly, just the quiet disbelief of someone who realizes how invisible they've become. When Liam came out later with his coffee mug, he waved from the porch, distracted. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Morning," I replied. I wanted to ask about the sign, but I didn't. There was no point. The answer was already there, nailed into the wood. I spent the rest of the day mending a tear in the curtain, cooking soup I did not want, and reading the same paragraph of a book 5 times. By sunset, I found myself outside again, watching the main house from a distance. Through their large windows, I could see them moving. Chloe arranging flowers, Liam carrying plates. They were setting the table again. For a dinner I wasn't invited to. I wondered if they even remembered the dinners we used to have when he was young. Back then, he would tell me everything. How he wanted to travel, how he wanted to build houses for people who couldn't afford them, how he wanted to make me proud. And he had. Once. Now he built walls. Expensive ones. The moon rose slow and full, spreading light over the lake. I walked toward the water, letting the cool air bite my cheeks. The reflection of the main house shimmered on the surface, bright, almost unreal. I thought of my husband again. He would have hated this silence between me and our son. He used to say, "You can lose a fight, Zaria, but never lose your place." I had lost both. Or maybe just misplaced them. The wind picked up, carrying a faint sound from the house. Laughter again. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking back in, sitting down at their table, speaking every truth I'd swallowed for years. But what would it change? They had already decided who I was. An old woman occupying space that could be useful. I turned back toward my cottage. The earth felt soft under my shoes, the way land does before rain. Inside, the clock ticked past midnight. I sat at my desk and opened the old wooden box that held my documents. Bills, photos, letters, and beneath them, a thick envelope sealed long ago. The label was faded, but the words still clear. Deed of ownership, Hawkins property. My name was printed below in black ink, steady and certain. It had never been crossed out, never replaced. I ran a hand across the paper, tracing the outline of my name as if reacquainting myself with an old friend. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not revenge, just the calm of someone remembering that silence does not mean surrender. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft against the roof, steady as breath. I closed the box, blew out the candle, and whispered into the dark, "You wanted me gone, but this land remembers who it belongs to." The night answered with nothing but rain. And for the first time in years, that nothing felt like peace. Morning carried the smell of lake water and cut grass, the kind of scent that makes you believe a day can be gentle. I stood on my little porch with a cup of mint tea and watched fog climbing off the water like a pale animal reluctant to leave. The main house glowed behind the mist, lights flicked on in the kitchen, then in the long glass room that used to be my apple tree. Chloe moved through the rooms as if the house itself had been designed to follow her. By mid-morning, a delivery van rolled up the drive. 2 men carried in folding tables and chairs that gleamed like new teeth. I had seen these rituals before. A guest list that sounded like a resume, a menu that looked like a trophy. Music turned low so that the neighbors would say, "Tasteful, not loud." I put on my garden gloves and walked into the lavender rows. When the wind moved through them, the purple swayed in slow waves. I tried to match my breath to that rhythm and not to the tempo of tires and doors and orders being shouted from the kitchen porch. I clipped a few sprigs and tucked them into my apron pocket. I had once taught Liam to rub the flowers between his fingers to release the oil. He used to lift his hands to his face and smile as if he had captured summer. I could still see him that way, if I tried hard enough, a small boy with a gap between his teeth, proud of the scent he thought he had invented. I whispered his name, and the garden gave it back to me as a private echo. By noon, the yard had changed. A bartender wiped crystal glasses with white cloth. A caterer arranged trays of oysters over ice that crackled like snow. Chloe directed everything with that calm brightness she wore like perfume. I saw her notice me, then look away, then notice me again. She walked toward the fence with the smile she used for other women she needed something from. "Zarya," she called lightly. "Would you mind keeping the path clear by the cottage today? We want guests to mingle in the front garden. The view is better from there." I looked at the lake. The view was the same whichever way you faced if you knew how to look at water. I nodded anyway. "And maybe bring the laundry in," she added, still smiling. "Some guests think lines outside look a little, rustic." I thought about the word, rustic. A word people use when they want the charm of a thing without the truth of it. I said nothing. She took that as agreement. A black car arrived, and a woman in a white coat stepped out, carrying a leather case. The last time I had seen a coat like that, it belonged to a doctor who took my husband's blood pressure without looking him in the eye. This woman walked with a spring, like she owned more than time. Inside the case were bottles. The bartender flinched and made space for them with a small bow. Chloe clapped softly. Liam watched from the porch with a drink in his hand and a distance in his face that made me think of fog again. I went back to the lavender, not because it needed anything from me, but because I needed something from it. I trimmed along the row that reached the old stone bird bath. A sparrow rested there in the shallow bowl, head tilted, as if reading my thoughts. When I moved, it stayed. I felt ridiculous for thanking it out loud. The first guests drifted through the gate. Laughter spread across the lawn like spilled champagne. You can tell a lot about people by the way they walk through a garden. Some step lightly and look down, careful not to crush what they cannot grow. Others stare ahead, as if the world is only a hallway to their next mirror. These guests were the second kind, perfume against soil, polished shoes against the path I laid with my son. Someone said the word property, as if it were a prayer. Someone else said the word networking, as if they had invented it. An older man wandered past the bartender and kept going, curious and brave in the way people are when they do not expect to be corrected. He found himself on the back path near my cottage. He saw me, tapped the brim of an invisible hat, and smiled. "Do you work here?" he asked. His tone was kind, as if he were doing me the honor of not being surprised. I looked at my hands, at my gloves dusted with pollen and soil. There was a time when that question would have cut me. Now it simply placed me on a map I already knew too well. "I tend the garden," I said. It was true enough. "Lovely job," he replied. He pointed toward the lavender rows. "They smell like someone still believes in quiet." Chloe appeared at his elbow with the speed of a host who can smell misdirection. "This way," she cooed. "You must see the front terrace. The view is spectacular near the water feature." He allowed himself to be turned. She did not look at me. She did not need to. Some victories are so small they vanish even as you hold them. Afternoon softened. Shadows stretched long and thin over the lawn. The music turned warmer, a low thrum that kept people close. I stood at the border of my garden and their party, and felt each space performing itself. Behind me, the earth, unashamed. Before me, the stage, perfectly lit. A young woman in a red dress broke away from a group and came toward the lavender. She crouched to take a photograph, then glanced up at me with a shy smile. "My grandmother planted roses," she said. "She used to talk to them as if they were children. I never understood it." "Some things bloom when spoken to," I said. She laughed softly. "Do you think people do?" "They do," I answered, "but not always for the speaker." Her smile faded into thought. She thanked me and returned to the party. I watched her tuck her phone into her clutch, as if the moment had become heavier than a picture. A little later, I saw Liam walking the perimeter with two men in jackets that looked expensive even from a distance. He gestured toward the back lot, then toward the left side where the old willow tree had once stood before a storm took it. One of the men drew a rectangle in the air with his finger. Liam nodded. The men did the slow, polite laugh of people who had already made up their minds. The bartender brought out a tray of something pale and sparkling, and everyone's shoulders lifted as one. Chloe tapped a knife to a glass. The bright ring sliced the air and drew every face toward her. She thanked them for coming, said a few lines about community and growth, and then presented Liam like a prize. He said they were excited to share new plans for a guest cottage, maybe even a small studio for visiting friends. Everyone clapped. No one asked what the land wanted. When the applause thinned, a waiter moved a tall standing table to the edge of the back path. Another waiter brought shrubs in planters and set them like a wall. In an hour, the party had closed off the narrow way that led to my door. I stood beside the lavender, with my shears open, and could not decide whether to cut or to fold them closed. I did neither. Toward dusk, a wind from the lake lifted the tablecloths and made the glasses chime lightly. Guests pressed their hands to their hair and laughed at the breeze as if it had been invited. I felt it move through my sleeves and down the length of my spine. It smelled like rain in another county. It smelled like change that took its time. A delivery truck returned just before dark. Two men carried long plastic tubs. They set them behind the hedge with careful grunts. When they left, Chloe pulled back the lid of one tub and peered inside with a look that was almost hunger. I could not see what was in it. I did not need to. I have lived long enough to recognize the shape of a plan by the way it hides. When the last guest left, the yard sagged in relief. The caterer packed the rented silver, and the bartender counted bottles. Chloe hugged everyone with a joy that sat on top of her like a crown. Liam gathered empty candles and lined them near the steps. The sky had turned the color of bruised peaches. I felt a weight behind my eyes and pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose, not to push tears back, but to push memory into its seat. I returned to my cottage by the long way so I would not have to pass the planters. Halfway there, I stopped and looked back at the house that used to be mine, and at the water that still was. I could hear Chloe laughing inside, that bright ringing that made people think she was made of light. I could hear Liam say something I could not catch. I could hear nothing that sounded like me. I went in, locked the door, and set my shears on the table. The deed lay where I had left it, under the lamp, steady and patient. I did not touch it. I did not need to. It would still be there in the morning. I turned the lamp off, and the room filled with a kind of darkness that felt like velvet. From my bed, I watched the square of window glow and fade as clouds drifted across the moon. The garden rustled in its sleep. The lake breathed. Somewhere, a fox barked once, then thought better of a second try. I slept as if the house had a hand on my shoulder. Morning would come with new orders. I suspected that before I closed my eyes. I suspected it the way you smell rain long before the first drop finds you. Chloe started early. I heard her heels on the porch planks and then the lower note of men's boots. When I opened my door, the sky was the soft color of paper waiting for ink. The air held both chill and promise. A tape measure snapped open near the hedge. Someone said, "There," and someone else answered, "Perfect." 4 bright orange stakes appeared in the ground along the edge of my lavender. They were not in a line yet, only suggestions, but sometimes suggestions are louder than facts. A young man with a clipboard smiled at me without seeing me. "Survey," he said to the air around my face. "Nothing to worry about." I looked at the first stake. It had a plastic head and a thin body that trembled in the breeze, as if even it knew it did not belong. I wanted to pull it up and fling it into the lake. Instead, I knelt and clipped lavender. 1, 2, 3, until the scent rose like a defense. Chloe came toward me with the contractor. She wore sneakers now, and a soft sweater with a tiny logo near the collarbone. She placed her palms together, as if clapping without sound. The gesture people make when they are about to say something that they want you to accept as inevitable. "Good morning, Zaria," she said. "Do you remember the guest cottage I mentioned? We are getting a few measurements done. It will be so charming back here. Think of it as a fresh chapter for all of us." The contractor nodded and pointed at a square on his plan. I saw a rectangle that sliced through the middle of my herb beds. "Not there," I said quietly. Chloe turned her head slightly. "Pardon. Not through the lavender," she smiled, with her lips closed. "Of course, we will preserve as much as possible. The plan is flexible. The main thing is the line of sight from the terrace." I looked at her, then at the man with the plan, then at the stakes trembling like small flags with no country. I did not argue. Arguing wastes a kind of energy that I needed to save. By mid-morning, there were 8 stakes, and a string stretched between 2 of them, like an idea becoming a rule. The young man with the clipboard said they might bring a small machine to test the soil next week. He described the machine as if it were a pet, friendly and quick. I nodded. The lake nodded with me. I made tea and carried a cup to the garden, then set it on the stone rim of the bird bath. A dragonfly hovered above the surface and drew a tiny circle in the air that felt like a blessing. I let the steam curl around my face and tried to breathe like someone who still belonged to herself. Liam came out at last. He moved slowly, that new slowness I had noticed in him, a tiredness that did not match the rest of his life. He saw me and offered a thin smile. "Busy morning," he said. "Chloe has a vision." "I see it," I answered. He stood there, with his hands in his pockets, and looked everywhere but at the stakes. "Mom," he said finally, "about what Chloe mentioned at dinner. About communities. I do not want you to think we are trying to push you. We just want what is best. You always gave me what was best. I want to return that. So," he believed what he said. I could hear it in the careful ring of his words. I could also hear the ghost of other things he had not said yet. "Do you remember the summer we planted the first lavender?" I asked. "You were 10. You kept dropping the seedlings and apologizing to them." He laughed once, surprised. "I forgot that." "I did not," I said. "The garden remembers too." He looked at the stakes then, and for a second I saw him as a boy, with soil on his knees and a fierce need to do right. Then the second closed. He patted my shoulder and walked toward the contractor. The afternoon sun came out and turned the tops of the stakes into tiny flames. A neighbor wandered over to the fence and asked Chloe what was happening. She used her bright voice and said something about adding value and maximizing potential. The neighbor nodded the way people nod when they want to be invited to whatever is coming. Around 3, the wind shifted and brought the smell of rain. The men packed up, leaving the stakes like teeth in a grin. Chloe stood with her arms crossed and studied the string lines, as if a house could be dreamed into being by staring at it hard enough. Liam ran his fingers along the string and looked troubled. I wondered whether he felt the wrong kind of music in it, a song that did not belong to us. When they went inside, I walked the length of the lavender and stopped at each stake. I placed my palm flat near the base and pressed until the plastic creaked. I did not push further. I wanted to. My body asked me to. Instead, I pulled my hand away and let the post shiver back into pride. I am allowed to choose when to be patient, I told myself. I am allowed to remember the difference between a garden and a battlefield. Evening darkened. The string line faded to a thin suggestion against the grass. I lit a candle in the cottage and placed it near the deed. I did not need the light to read my name, but I let it burn anyway. The flame made the paper seem alive. It breathed with me. If anyone had passed my window at that hour, they might have thought I was praying. Perhaps I was. I wrote a list. Not goals and not threats. A list of what would not be taken from me without my consent. My name, my dignity, my right to quiet, my way with plants, the memory of the man I married and the boy we raised, the understanding that a house is not a home if it tries to make you smaller in order to fit, the understanding that land is patient but not blind. When I finished, I folded the paper and slipped it inside the book of poems I kept near the bed. I touched the worn spine and then touched the glass of the window. Beyond it, the lake carried a path of moonlight that looked like a road for someone with bare feet and faith. The wind skated over the water and came toward me smelling like iron and rain. The first drop hit the porch rail and made a sound that could have been a kiss or a warning. Then more drops, close together, a quiet drum. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch without shoes. The wood was cool under my soles. The rain found my face and my hair and my throat. It found the string line, it found the stakes, it found the lavender and pressed its scent into the air until the whole yard breathed purple. I stood very still and let it wash me. The main house windows glowed gold. A figure moved past a curtain. Another figure joined it. They paused and watched the rain. I raised my cup and drank cold water from the sky. Later, when the storm had softened, I went back inside and dried my feet with a towel my husband had once used at the lake. The cloth was thin now, but dependable. I placed it over the back of a chair and smiled at its stubbornness. I lay in bed and listened to the final patter. My breath fell into time with it. Somewhere, a car splashed down the road and kept going. Somewhere, a branch dropped its gathered weight and sighed. Somewhere, the stakes leaned a fraction and then held. Sleep came slowly. It walked up the path and sat at the end of the bed and waited for me to join it. I did, at last, not because I was tired, though I was, but because rest is a form of resistance too. The deed lay quiet under the lamp. The lavender outside exhaled. The lake turned over a new page and did not tell anyone what was written on it. Tomorrow there would be more plans and more string and more explanations that sounded like kindness. I would answer each with the simple truth that you cannot redecorate roots. I would keep my hands clean enough to sign a paper and dirty enough to keep my nerve. I would remember that silence has a voice when it is ready. And when morning returned, I would rise, make tea, and step into the garden like a woman entering a chapel that she built herself. The day began like any other good day tries to begin. The lake was quiet. The first light folded itself over the water, and a heron lifted from the reeds with such steady grace that I felt my breath steady with it. I swept the porch, watered the mint, and let the kettle sing until it sounded satisfied. I thought I would spend the morning pruning and the afternoon reading. I thought small thoughts, the safe kind. By noon the sun pressed close, the kind of warmth that makes shadows short and honest. I took a bowl of peaches to the back steps of the main house. I still brought fruit sometimes, a habit from years when my gestures were welcome. I rang the bell and waited. No one came. I heard voices upstairs and the faint spill of music from a phone. I set the bowl inside the mudroom and turned to go. The kitchen window was open. It had never mattered before. Today, it mattered. I heard Chloe say my name in a tone that placed it on a list. Zaria. Then a pause. We have to decide. Liam answered, softer. I could not hear the words. I took a single step toward the open window, then another, and felt foolish for how carefully I moved across soil that knew me. I was close enough to see the glint of the faucet and the neat row of knives on a magnetic strip. Chloe leaned against the counter with a stack of glossy brochures. Her nail traced a circle around a smiling couple in one of the photos. A community near the bay, she said. They have a greenhouse. They have music nights. There is a shuttle to the market so she does not need to drive. People seem happier when they move there. She set that brochure down and lifted another. This one has a clinic on site. Falls are a real risk at her age. I stood very still. A bee drifted near my ear and changed its mind. Liam spoke. I heard the weight in his voice, even before I caught the words. I do not want her to feel abandoned. He paused, then added with a tired laugh. That word looks dramatic in my head and smaller out loud. Chloe tipped her head and gave him a look I had seen many times, the one that keeps the peace while changing the rules. We are not abandoning anyone, she said. We are making room for her comfort, for our future. She listed the reasons with the rhythm of a recipe. The cottage is old, the stairs are narrow, the path is uneven, the winter gets icy, she is alone too often. Then she stopped listing and lowered her voice. Also, the Hendersons are coming again. I do not want to explain why there is laundry on the line. People notice these things. They notice what kind of life we keep around us. Silence moved into the kitchen like a third person. I could not see Liam, but I could feel him struggle with the shape of his duty. He had always wanted to be good. It is hard to be good when the scale you use is not your own. He said, we will help with the costs. She will be fine. Chloe said, "Yes, she will have company. She loves plants. She can volunteer in the greenhouse. They have yoga. Gentle kind." She waited, then added, "And we will finally have space to finish the guest cottage." There it was, a door opening where a door had always been. I heard a knife slide against a board, the soft push of tomatoes, the small sounds of a meal making itself. Liam said, "We should talk to her tonight." Chloe answered, "We should tell her tonight." There is a difference between talk and tell. They chose the second without noticing. I stepped back from the window and tried to steady myself on my own breath. The garden smelled like sun and rosemary. A squirrel dropped from the maple and ran a quick, jagged path across the grass. I watched it negotiate the world with perfect confidence, and I felt an ache that surprised me with its age. I went home by the long way through the lavender. I did not trust the short way anymore. Inside the cottage, I poured water I did not want and drank it anyway. Then I sat at the small table that had once been white and is now the color of permanent use. My hands lay flat on the wood. The lines across my palms looked like maps of a country I had forgotten to visit. I tried to imagine what a gentle community might look like for me. I pictured the greenhouse first, and for a moment I felt the ease of it. Warm air, neat benches, the comfort of a schedule. Then I pictured the shuttle and the careful walk from seat to door. I pictured the soft smile of a nurse who knows your history and not your story. I pictured my name on a small plaque by a small door, letters tidy and obedient. I could see myself waving to women with soft sweaters, asking a man with a kind face about the weather for the 5th time around 2 in the afternoon. I could see peace there. I could, but the image of it did not settle into me. It hovered above me like a hat borrowed for a photograph. I stood and opened the drawer where I keep what matters: scissors, tape, a pencil that still smells like cedar. At the back of the drawer was the small key I had not needed for years. It was a simple thing, no engraving, no ornament, just purpose. I turned and faced the wardrobe. The safe rested behind a shelf that holds old blankets. I moved the blankets. I pressed the key into the lock. It did not resist. Some doors forget to be difficult when you approach them without fear. Inside were the documents that people decide are real because paper tells them to. Birth certificate, marriage certificate, a letter from a bank that no longer exists, the worn envelope that holds the last photograph of my husband smiling, with a fish in his hands, and the first sadness in his eyes. Beneath these was a folder stiff with age. I lifted it onto the table and opened it with both hands, as if it were a book that deserved respect. Deed of ownership, Hawkins property. My name, owner. The letters looked calm. They did not boast. They did not plead. They rested on the page with the serene authority of truth that does not need to argue. I ran my fingertips lightly across the ink, as if touch could set it moving again through the years. I remembered the day we signed, how my husband squeezed my fingers once under the desk, a quick pulse that said, "Yes, we did it." I remembered bringing Liam here when he was still losing baby teeth and showing him where the boundary stones lay, how solid and plain they looked in the soil. He had jumped from one to the next, a small bright animal, and I had said, "Careful," not because the stones were dangerous, but because what they represented was, borders can be useful. They can also be weapons. I closed my eyes. The room found a deeper silence that had weight and shape. I could feel the decision standing up inside me, like a person who had been sitting patiently for a very long time. I did not feel angry. I felt accurate. Before sunset, I returned the deed to its folder, and the folder to the safe. I left the key on the table. It shone in a thin line of light that slipped through the curtain and landed exactly where it needed to. I went outside and worked in the garden until the sky turned the color of the inside of a peach. I dug my hands into the soil and let the cool damp climb into my skin. The earth does not care who owns it. It cares who tends it. I told it I was both, and it said nothing, which was comfort. When the lamps came on in the main house, I heard chairs move and glasses lift. I heard the small collective sigh that begins meals. I walked down to the water and stood where the lake slides up to the shore and pauses as if considering whether to introduce itself. Across the surface, the lights of our 2 houses appeared as a single soft ribbon. My reflection stood between them like a line drawn with a pale pencil. I said my husband's name to the water and asked if he would approve. The water made its small answer against my shoes. I chose to hear yes. I also chose to hear try not to be cruel. I could do one of those for certain. I could attempt the other. I slept light that night, a kind of floating rest that keeps one ear open. It was enough. Morning would bring the talk. I would listen. I would speak one sentence. Then I would go and do what the papers already knew I could do. I left the window open a little so the lake could breathe with me. The deed waited in the safe, patient as stone. My hands folded around themselves and remembered what it means to hold. I slept. I woke before the alarm I do not own. Dawn had not yet made up its mind. I put water on, then changed my mind and let the kettle rest. The garden called for a last ordinary hour. I went out with a basket and picked mint and sage and the smallest lavender heads so delicate they felt like secrets. I arranged them in a jar on my table and smiled at the way even a simple thing can stand up straight when you give it a purpose. By 9, a delivery truck arrived with boxes of tile samples. A man in a cap set them on the porch of the main house and left without ringing. I watched from the path and thought about pattern. Some patterns, people lay with intention. Some patterns arrive because no one said stop. Chloe texted me at 10. She liked to avoid face-to-face until the script was rehearsed. Can we talk this evening? I wrote back, of course. She sent a heart that felt like a sticker placed over a crack. I spent the afternoon mending a sweater and listening to a station that plays older songs in the middle of the day when no one is driving. My fingers remembered the rhythm of small repairs, and I felt a quiet pride in a skill that asks for patience more than talent. When I finished, I folded the sweater and put it with the other few things I would keep no matter where I slept. The act of choosing is a door. I stepped through it without noise. At 5, I walked to the main house. I did not knock. I had been told once that I did not need to knock. That was a long time ago, but some permissions stay valid even when their affection expires. Liam and Chloe sat at the dining table with a stack of brochures and a glossy folder. The light through the window made a soft square on the floor that did not touch any of our feet. Chloe began and thanked me for coming, and then used the word we often. We have researched. We have found. We have committed to supporting you through this transition. She spoke as if she were guiding me across a street. Liam listened to her for a minute, then looked at me. Mom, I do not want you to feel forced. This is not a punishment. We want you safe. He paused and swallowed. And we need the space back here. Chloe lifted a plan that showed a rectangle in the place where my lavender was breathing at that moment. She said words like value and growth and future guests and the kind of family they wanted to be. She promised I would visit whenever I wanted. She promised I would have a private room and a balcony and meals I did not have to cook. She promised a greenhouse. She promised a shuttle. She promised I would never be lonely again. I looked at the drawing until it blurred. Then I set it down and spoke. I said, thank you for thinking of me. I said, you will not have to worry. I said, I will be gone by morning. Chloe blinked and then brightened as if the sky had obeyed her. This is wonderful, she said. We will help you pack. No, I answered, there is very little to pack. I will take what I can carry, and what I cannot will have to find another story. Liam stared at the table. The vein at his temple made a small, visible pulse. Where will you go? He asked. Somewhere that fits, I said. He nodded once and did not look at Chloe. I stood. One more thing, I said. There is a corner of the garden where the marigolds return every year. I would like them to remain untouched until they finish their season. Chloe exhaled, as if I had asked to drag a boat through the dining room. We will try, she said. Try is a fine word for the weather. It is less useful for promises. I thanked them for dinner I had not eaten and walked home across the path I had made, with stones and hope. The air shifted. I could smell the lake changing its face for evening. Inside the cottage, I opened the wardrobe and lifted the old suitcase from the shelf. The zipper resisted and then agreed. I placed the sweater, a dress that makes me feel awake, 2 shirts, a skirt that can forgive the way I move when I am tired, a pair of walking shoes, and the photograph of Liam at 10, with lavender oil on his fingers. I added my husband's compass with the crack across the lid, and the letter he once wrote from a hotel in a town with a name I cannot pronounce. I took the jar of herbs from the table and clipped 3 stems of mint and 1 of lavender, and tucked them into a small paper envelope. I breathed it in and closed the envelope as if I were sealing a spell. I took the deed from the safe. I placed it in a document pouch and slid the pouch into the suitcase with the care people usually reserve for living things. In a way, it is the story of us, written in a language officials understand. I wrote a short note and left it on the counter under the salt shaker so that it would not float away. Liam, my boy, I do not want to be a burden. I am leaving because peace fits me better than this room. Do not worry for me. I know where I am going. Take care of your days. Love, Mom. I looked around the room a final time. The chair with the paint rubbed away where my hand rests, the small lamp with its tilted shade, the window with a hairline crack in the corner that only shows itself in certain light, the kettle with the handle that hurts a little and makes me feel alive. I touched each with my eyes, and that was enough. I locked the door and stood on the porch with the suitcase handle in my palm. The lake breathed a silver path toward the other shore. The stars arrived without apology. The night said go in a language made of crickets and cool air. At the path, I paused and knelt. I pressed my fingers to the soil and let them come away dark. I touched my thumb to my tongue and tasted the garden one last time. It tasted like iron and rain and the green part of summer. I stood and walked. Past the stakes, past the string, past the sign that told me not to enter a place I built. Past the idea that love can survive without respect, past the version of myself that mistook endurance for devotion. At the road, I turned right. The station would be open by the time I reached it. The first train would be mine. I did not know exactly which city would catch me, but I knew the law of gravity. What is meant to land will land. Behind me, the houses kept their lights. Ahead of me, the morning practiced its first pale notes. My suitcase wheels hummed a steady line that sounded almost like music. In the distance, a fox crossed from shadow to shadow, with the confidence of a creature that answers only to its own map. I did not look back. People say that is strength. I think sometimes it is simply accuracy. The future was in front of me. The ground was mine. The next page waited, and I had the pen. Dawn lifted like a careful hand. The sky over the lake held that shy blue that belongs to the hour before decisions turn into actions. I washed the teacup, dried it, and set it upside down on the counter as if a small ritual could bless what came next. The suitcase waited by the door with the patience of something that had endured attic summers and closet winters and still believed in usefulness. I wrote my name on a plain card and slipped it into the sleeve on the handle. The letters looked calm. I said them in my head like a promise. Zaria Hawkins, the sound steadied me. I opened the wardrobe and took one last look at the empty hangers. A sweater remained on the hook, the soft gray one with one elbow a shade lighter from sun. I did not take it. A house should keep a single gentle memory. Outside, the path wore a faint gloss from the rain that had passed in the night. The stones I had placed with my son gleamed in the thin light. I stepped onto them with care, not from weakness but from respect. Each stone had been a decision once. Each still held the whisper of that choice. My suitcase wheels murmured along behind me in a sound that felt as steady as a heart that has decided to go on. At the gate, I paused. The orange stakes slept in the wet grass, their plastic heads dulled by dew. The string line sagged, just enough to show that nothing straight stays straight forever. I did not touch them. I did not need to. Some endings announced themselves without help. The road to the station carried the usual morning shapes. A truck with ladders clattered by in a burst of hard-working noise. A woman in a blue coat hurried a small dog that preferred interest to speed. The smell of coffee drifted from the bakery at the corner, where I had once bought birthday pastries for Liam, in boxes tied with narrow ribbon. The shopkeeper was placing chairs on the sidewalk one by one, the way a person sets a table for a day. The station waited like a mouth ready to speak. I bought a ticket with a name that felt like a question. The clerk slid the paper toward me and did not ask where I was going beyond the line that mattered to her screen. I thanked her. Gratitude sat easily in my mouth that morning. It tasted like fresh air. On the platform, the train pulled in with the long breath of something that carries many lives at once. I found a seat by the window. The lake passed to my left, and then became a river, and then a suggestion. Houses scattered themselves across the land, like sentences that ended too soon. The sky brightened and kept brightening until it forgot it had ever been dark. I opened the small pouch that held my papers and rested my fingers on the document I had taken from the safe. I did not pull it out. I only needed to feel its quiet weight. The car swayed and clicked. I let the rhythm sink into my bones. Other passengers rustled with sleep and coffee and plans. A child whispered a secret to a stuffed animal. An old gentleman adjusted his tie for no one at all. We were a choir of separate lives humming one song. Fields gave way to towns, towns to denser streets. Bridges crossed the train like gentle orders. I felt the first pulse of the city before the skyline arrived. There is a sound buildings make when they gather together. It is a sound like water under ice. It is a sound like a hum that has learned to read. Boston greeted me with the clean clatter of arrivals. I stood, stretched the stiffness from my legs, and joined the river of bodies moving toward the stairs. The station air held the scent of metal and bread, and a hint of something sweet from a cart near the door. I followed the signs to the street, hailed a cab, and said the address that had sat in my pocket for years, like an unopened letter. The driver knew the building. Most drivers do. The firm lived inside a tower of practical glass that reflected a sky busy with clouds. The elevator rose with the smooth confidence of a machine that has no doubts. The carpet in the corridor was the color of late smoke. The reception desk held a bowl of mints and a vase of lilies that smelled like clean sheets. Edward Klein stepped into the lobby before they could announce me. He had the same way of walking as when he and my husband used to argue kindly over baseball and contract language, that forward lean that said he would rather meet a thing than wait for it. His hair had gone mostly white. His voice had kept its steadiness. "Zaria," he said, as if the name were a fact rather than a greeting. He took my hands in both of his. His grip was cool and firm and present. "Come in." His office was the color of good wood and better paper. The window framed a city that had brought its best posture to the day. He gestured toward a chair. I sat. He poured water into a glass and set it in front of me. I did not realize until I tasted it how thirsty I had been. "I will not take much of your time," I said. "I have a request. It is simple in words. It may not be simple in feeling." He waited without speaking. That is a rare skill. It is also the first kind of listening. I placed the document pouch on the desk and slid out the deed. The paper looked both older and stronger than the room. I set it before him, as if laying down a card no one expected me to carry. "I never transferred it," I said. "Not even in part. The land remains mine. I want to sell it, all of it, as soon as I can without becoming foolish." He studied the page. His eyes moved the way a careful reader moves through a story that has hidden chapters. Then he looked up. "Is this about them?" he asked, not unkindly. "In a way," I said, "but mostly it is about me." He nodded once. "Good." He lifted the phone and told a name to come in. A young associate with clear eyes and quick hands arrived with a notebook. Another name brought a paralegal with a file of records already half-printed. The room changed speed without losing its calm. Numbers appeared. Maps opened. Screens lit with parcel shapes and zoning lines and tables of recent sales. Edward spoke to them, as if directing a quiet orchestra. He asked for a title search. He asked for a boundary confirmation. He asked for a call to a developer who had lingered near this region, like a bird that knows where the next tree will fall. He asked for a timeline and then asked for an earlier one. I answered questions with dates and names and the kind of facts that love to be written down. When the paralegal said, "There is no recorded transfer," I felt something unclench in the middle of my chest. Not triumph, recognition. The law remembers things people choose to forget. We paused long enough for coffee to arrive. I did not want coffee. I wanted the hot bitterness as a sign that things were moving through their proper steps. Edward put sugar in his, with the fierce attention of a man who understands small rituals are how you keep the larger ones from unraveling. "Do you want to sleep on it?" he asked when the last call had ended and the room had returned to the slow hum of climate systems and distant traffic. "I have not slept on it for months," I said. "I would prefer to sign while both courage and clarity are in the room." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then, let us keep them here." He laid the preliminary documents on the desk. He explained what each paragraph promised and what it refused. He slid the pen toward me and rested his finger above the line where my name would live in new ink. "Once you sign," he said, "a process will begin that is difficult to reverse. You know this." "I do," I said. I also know that some harm only ends when you stop believing you can persuade it to be kind. I wrote my name, steady, complete, all the way to the last letter. The room did not change. The sky did not flare. The city did not bow. My breath did soften, as if a hand had been lifted off my sternum. Edward countersigned. The associates gathered the pages with practiced care. A courier waited at the door before anyone called him. The building had its own idea of anticipation. "You can stay in a guest residence we keep for clients," Edward said. "A week, a month, as needed. No one will bother you. I will pay," I said. "You will try," he answered, which was his way of saying no. I thanked him and rose. He did not offer a speech. He placed his palm on the desk and looked at me the way a person looks at a harbor after a storm. Grateful, a little amazed, ready to see the rest of the weather. On the street, the city looked brand new. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. I walked to the guest building through a block where the trees laced their branches above the sidewalks like fingers. The apartment had high windows and a view of rooftops that stepped down toward a square. The bed felt like a small cloud. The kitchen was sensible. A narrow balcony held a pot with nothing in it. I took the paper envelope from my pocket, the one with mint and a pinch of lavender. I crumbled the leaves into the pot, pressed them to the soil the building had provided, and poured a glass of water for both of us. Evening slid over the city in a soft gray coat. Lights pricked the buildings one by one until the skyline looked like a careful constellation rearranged by human stubbornness. In the corner of the room, a small lamp made a circle that felt like a room inside the room. I sat in that circle and let my shoulders drop back to where they belong. My phone vibrated on the table. Liam, then Chloe, then a number I did not know that I knew must be hers from work. I let each vibration pass through me like a wave through a rock. The rock does not ignore the wave. It simply remembers what it was before water learned to speak. I ran a bath and poured in the small bottle of soap left by the sink. The water turned the color of pearls and smelled faintly of cedar. I sank into it and closed my eyes and allowed every muscle somersault to resolve itself without memory. When I stepped out, the mirror held a face that looked older, yes, but completely owned. I made tea in a pot that had never met my hand before, and it tasted right anyway. I stood by the window and watched a woman in a bright coat pull a suitcase down the sidewalk. Her stride said business. Her posture said apology to no one. I wished her a safe arrival out loud to a room that was learning my voice. Night filled itself. I slept with the kind of rest that is not escape but return. The deed was no longer a question. The dawn would not feel like a test. The ground had chosen me again, and I had chosen the ground. I slept. I woke to the city's morning percussion. A garbage truck offered its iron music. Bicycles stitched quick lines between lanes. A vendor called coffee in a voice that turned the word into a blessing. The air had the clean chill that reminds you that breathing is a privilege. I dressed in the blue shirt that lifts my spirits and the black skirt that does not ask me to be smaller. I tied my hair back with the ribbon I saved from one of Liam's birthday boxes. Some relics are not for grief. They are for inventory. I looked at myself and nodded. The person in the glass looked ready to be believed. At the firm, the corridor opened like a well-rehearsed scene. The paralegal greeted me with a folder the size of a promise. Title clear, boundaries confirmed, buyer enthusiastic. The developer's letterhead had a crest that made me think of rivers and ambition. The offer exceeded any number I had allowed myself to imagine. The timeline was brisk. The memorandum noted demolition rights and schedule permissions that unfolded with both speed and law. "Are you certain about including total clearance?" Edward asked in our second meeting. "We can request a salvage period." "I am certain," I said. "I am not interested in archiving mistakes." He studied me for a beat, then placed a finger on the page and continued. We set dates. We agreed on an escrow that would be morning fast. We chose a courier path with redundancies, as if the city might forget how to carry papers. The pen felt lighter this time. The signature felt like the second step in a dance that my body already knew. We paused only once when the associate mentioned access notices. The letters would need to be hand-delivered, vacate within 5 business days. The phrase held a cold elegance that made me think of winter roses. I watched the words rest in their box of print. I let their shape enter me without pity and without fever. "Zarya," Edward said quietly, There will be noise. There already is, I answered. This one simply has a purpose. While the documents move through their channels, I walked the city to spend my waiting honestly. I crossed a bridge where the river held the sky like a mirror that had learned generosity. I stood in a square where a street musician played a song so skillful it made strangers share a glance as if they had just been introduced. I entered a church because the door was open and lit a candle because the light understood what to do with my intention. I whispered my husband's name again, not as question this time, but as gratitude that endurance had not turned me into stone. When I returned to the apartment, a small plant had begun to show in the balcony pot where I had pressed mint and hope. A tiny green tip nosed through the soil with the arrogance of newness. I laughed, aloud and alone, and it sounded like a window opening. That afternoon the call came, funds secured in escrow, notices drafted, county filing scheduled. The law had performed its choreography, and the music had landed where it should. Edward said, "Tomorrow morning for delivery?" And I said, "I will not be there." And he said, "Good." Evening came with a soft rain that the streets absorbed like a blessing. I made a plate of toast and berries and ate standing up, as if by movement I could keep from floating away. The phone vibrated again. Liam. I let it ring once, and then another time. I placed my palm over the screen as if I could slow the urgency with a touch. I could not. I could only choose the next true act. I wrote him a message that said, "I am safe. I will speak when I am ready. Take care of yourself tonight." Then I set the phone face down and put my cup in the sink and washed it with slow circles until the water ran clear. The simple work returned my breath to the center of my body. Sleep came with small dreams that looked like rooms I did not know, but felt I could live in. Morning returned like a clear bell. I dressed and walked to the firm and nodded to the security guard, who now recognized me. Edward shook my hand and said, "It is done." Before I could ask the question, my cells had already answered. He showed me a copy of the delivery confirmation. He told me the clerk at the county had admired the efficiency of our filings. He said the developer would begin site preparation within the week. He asked if I wanted to be notified when the equipment arrived. I said yes. He added my email to the list that sends noon photos from the field to anxious investors and more private clients than they admit. We sat for a moment in a silence that was not empty. The city outside the window looked busy and unconcerned and entirely mine. Edward broke the quiet. "You could tell him," he said, gentler than before. "I will," I answered. "But not today. Today I will rest from becoming a person who asked for what she needed." He nodded and did not push. He printed a copy of every paper and placed them in a brown envelope with my name written at the top in his careful hand. I held it like a book that had grown from a seed I planted years ago by accident and watered with patience. On the walk back I passed a florist who had arranged buckets of flowers along the sidewalk. I stopped at the bucket of lavender. The stems were shorter than mine, and the color paler, but the scent was true. I bought a handful and carried it the way some people carry a flag. In the lobby, the concierge raised his eyebrows at the sudden field in my arm. In the elevator, an older woman said, "That brings back summers," and I smiled because it was bringing one forward for me. At the apartment, I set the lavender in a glass. I opened the balcony door and let the city wind move through the room and stir their heads. The plant in the pot had grown half an inch. I told it was doing very well. The phone buzzed, and I picked it up at last. A message from Liam. "Mom, please call me when you can. We love you. We want to understand." I read it twice. I set the phone down. I whispered, "I will call you when there is something to understand." I meant it. I did not add a time. Promises that include clocks are traps for the heart. Late afternoon brought the first email from the developer. Subject line, "Site access confirmed." A phone photo sat in the message like a postcard from a place I used to live. The drive, the hedge, the porch. In the foreground, the yellow snout of a machine leaning into frame as if curious. I felt the tremor that accompanies change and placed my hand flat on the table until the tremor realized it was not fear. Night folded itself around the building. I lay on the bed and watched the shadows of tree branches move across the ceiling like handwriting. The city sang its usual lullaby of distant sirens and neighbor laughter and doors closing with civilized care. I slept with the envelope on the bedside table within reach. The documents did not need my hand. I needed their company. In the morning, I would buy a small clay pot for the second plant I would begin. In the afternoon, I would walk by the river again, because water reminds me that force can be graceful. In the evening, I would drink mint tea that grew in a city and tasted like a field. The ground was mine. The future had my name on it. Somewhere a crew chief was reading a line on a paper that meant the old life had a schedule. I breathed in and out like a person who can live with that. I closed my eyes. I did not dream of houses. I dreamed of rooms with open windows and no signs that told me where I did not belong. The morning began with a soft bell from my phone. Subject line, "Notice packets ready." The words looked simple, almost shy, and yet they carried the weight of a door that would not open again once it closed. I stood by the window and watched a gull ride the city wind without moving its wings. Balance can look like stillness. It is not. At the firm, the lobby smelled faintly of lilies and printer toner. The paralegal met me with a folder so neat it seemed to have ironed itself. She showed me the letters on top. Each one carried the county stamp, the parcel number, the date, and the instruction that spoke without ornament. Vacate all structures within 5 business days. I traced the embossed seal with a fingertip and felt nothing but the mild pride of honest work. Edward stepped out of a conference room with a nod that looked like respect and not apology. He guided me into his office. The deed lay on his desk beside the final purchase agreement. A sheet of paper with wire instructions was clipped to a second folder. Everything had the crispness of a hospital before visiting hours. He walked me through each page again. We spoke softly, as if loud voices could jinx law. The schedule placed the first equipment on site the following week. Demolition to begin once utilities were safely capped and inspections made. Photos to be emailed daily at noon. A final accounting to be issued at the end of the project, along with a statement of cleared liabilities. He said the word clear more than once. I liked the sound of it. A courier entered with a leather satchel. He had the posture of someone trusted with fragile things. He laid the notices in order, clipped them, sealed them, then placed them back in the satchel, with care that made me want to thank him. I did. He looked startled, and then pleased. Nurses and couriers deserve more gratitude than they get. Delivery by hand in the next 2 hours, Edward said. We will file proof immediately after. I nodded. The city outside the window gathered its light. Cars moved along the avenues in silver lines. A crane turned its long neck toward a new wing of glass. Somewhere, a man in an orange vest lifted a stop sign at a crosswalk and lowered it again like a conductor beat. Progress is a choreography, flawed and relentless. Would you like to sit in the conference room while the courier is out? Edward asked. You can have quiet, coffee if you want it. I would like to walk, I said. I will return in an hour. He accepted the decision as if it were a document. I went north toward the river and let the wide water remind me that everything moves whether we approve or not. The wind off the surface smelled like iron and old stories. A boy on a scooter passed me with fierce concentration, and a father followed with an arm stretched but not touching. I thought of Liam at that age, and his small face serious with purpose as he learned to balance. I spoke his name under my breath, not as a plea and not as a curse, just as a name. On a bench, a woman my age fed crumbs to a pigeon who had the manners of a grateful guest. She looked up and met my eyes and gave me the smallest nod, the kind that passes between strangers who recognize the shape of a day on each other. I nodded back and walked on. When I returned to the firm, the courier was already back. The satchel lay on the reception desk like a completed sentence. The paralegal gave a thumbs up that would have looked silly in any other building. In this one, it felt like a hymn sung softly. Edward's assistant printed the filed proofs and set them in a thin folder with my name on the tab. I held it and felt again that peculiar calm that visits when decisions become facts. Would you like to see the escrow confirmation? Edward asked. I did. He turned his screen and showed me the line with my name and the number that sat beside it. There are amounts of money that feel like insult and amounts that feel like apology. This one felt like accuracy. He printed the notice for my records and handed it across the desk. Now we wait, he said. We do, I answered, but not for very long. On my way out, I stopped at the florist on the corner and bought a small pot of rosemary. The owner wrapped the pot in brown paper and tied it with string. The smell rose through the paper like an intelligent thought. I carried it home in both hands, as if it might teach me a new way to breathe. In the apartment, I set the rosemary beside the mint and watered them both. The balcony took the weight of my elbows, and the city offered itself as if it had invented sky. I stood there until my phone vibrated twice, in quick succession. 2 messages from unknown numbers. The first was an image of the main house front door with a white envelope taped above the handle. The second was the same door without the envelope. Below the image, a single word, delivered. I sat down at the small table and folded my hands. Sound receded. The room held its breath. I thought of the fork that had fallen against the plate on the night of the dinner. I thought of Chloe's earrings, swinging like a metronome for a song no one wanted to hear. I thought of the stake line, of the string, of the words private area nailed into wood that faced my door. Then I thought of the deed and the patience of ink. I made tea without watching the kettle. When the timer on the stove clicked, I poured the cup and sat by the window. I did not watch my phone. Staring at a path does not make the traveler arrive sooner. I sipped and waited in a stillness that felt like armor. The call came less than an hour later. The screen said Liam. I let it ring. The second call said Chloe. I let it ring. The third call displayed no name. I answered it. A woman's voice, crisp and trained. Mrs. Hawkins, this is the field manager for Westside Development. We have received access confirmation from the county and your council. We will be staging equipment late this week. Demolition team will begin on schedule Monday morning at 8. Do you have any restrictions you would like noted? Her tone offered courtesy without attachment. It was exactly the tone I wanted to meet. Yes, I said. The marigolds by the back fence will finish in about 3 weeks. If they can be removed intact and transplanted, I would be grateful. If that is not possible, I understand. Either way, please photograph the beds before and after. Send the images with the noon report. There was a brief pause and then a warning of the voice. We will do our best, Mrs. Hawkins. I will add the note now. Thank you, I said. I meant it. After the call, I placed the phone face down and let my shoulders relax. I watered the mint again, though it did not need it. I pressed a thumb to the soil and felt the small coolness announce itself like a truth. I whispered a sentence to the room. You will not be cruel. You will be precise. At dusk, I walked without choosing a direction and let the city decide my route. I wandered past bookstores with tables out front, past a bakery where a woman dusted sugar over a tray like she was speaking to the pastry, past a quiet courtyard where ivy climbed brick with patience. The world had its own business, and it comforted me. Back home, I opened the brown envelope from the firm and read each page as if it were a letter from a future version of myself. I traced the date. I signed my name in the quiet air to practice keeping it steady. I placed the papers in the drawer and closed it softly. When sleep came, it was deep and untroubled. I did not dream of houses falling. I dreamed of violet fields and a thin path through them, and a hand that I recognized even when I did not see it. The hand was my own. Morning would bring the first ripple of reaction from the lake. I would meet it with the same stillness that had carried me this far. The ground was a story that remembered me. The city was a room that fit. I was ready to hear the next sound the day would make. The next sound was the vibration of the phone, skipping across the table like a pebble on water. I let it finish its small dance before I reached for it. A message from the developer with the subject line that would soon become familiar. Access confirmed. Attached were 2 images. The drive with a temporary sign near the gate. The porch with a notice pinned at eye level. In both photos, the sky looked innocently blue. Weather does not pick sides. I set the phone down, and almost immediately it began again. Liam. I watched his name fill the screen and leave it, then fill and leave, like a tide that could not decide. I imagined him in the big kitchen, hands moving without purpose from counter to drawer. I pictured Chloe with a map of words already prepared, and a map of panic beneath it. I pressed my palm to my chest to remind my heart that it was mine. Another message arrived. This one, from Edward. Filing complete. Clerk acknowledged receipt. Next steps on schedule. Short, factual, kind. I took the rosemary to the sink and let water run over the soil until it darkened. The scent rose in a cool plume that made the room feel orderly. I placed the pot back on the balcony and watched a small bee make a quick investigation. Approval granted. Around noon, the first daily report landed in my inbox. Subject line, site prep. The email included 5 photos: the gravel shoulder cleared, the hedge trimmed back a careful foot, utility flags in colors bright enough to look festive from a distance. The note at the bottom thanked the owner for timely signatures. The word owner loosened something inside me that I had been holding tight for so long I had forgotten I held it. I wrote back to the field manager to thank her and to ask after the marigolds. She replied within minutes. "We will lift them on Friday and move them to the far corner until final pass. No guarantee. We will try again." A word that can irritate when used as a shield. A word that comforts when used as an honest promise. I let it be the second and closed the email. In the afternoon, I walked to a small market on the corner and bought lemons, honey, and a loaf of bread that sang against my knuckles when I tapped it. The clerk asked if I wanted a bag. I told him I had 2 hands, and he laughed. On the way back, a school group crossed the street in a file, each hand on the shoulder of the child ahead. Their teacher called out numbers, and the children answered in a wave. The city made room for them. Buses paused. A courier swung wide. I thought of process and how kindness can be a system when people agree to it. Back at the apartment, the phone finally went silent. The silence did not feel empty. It felt like weather breaking. I sat and read a book of short essays about gardens that thrive in difficult soil. The author wrote about patience and rhythm, and the discipline of knowing when to prune. I underlined a sentence: "Remove the branch that steals light from better wood." The evening brought softer light, and the first call I chose to answer. The field manager again. Her voice held a music I now recognized as competence. She said the crew would arrive on Saturday to stage the small excavator and a portable office. She said the crane would not be necessary for a site like this. She said the neighbors had already asked questions and had been given the public answers. She asked if I wanted security for the first day in case the residents resisted. She said it with care. I said yes, not to threaten, to keep everyone safe. After the call, I filled a pot with water and set it to boil. I sliced bread and squeezed a lemon and drizzled honey on a plate for dipping. I ate standing at the window like a woman who had found again the pleasure of simple food after a long illness. Outside, the traffic thinned to a hush. A siren wailed and faded. Somewhere below, a couple laughed and then fell quiet in the way that says an arm has found a shoulder. The next morning, put a silver coin of sun on my balcony table. I took my tea there and placed the brown envelope of documents beside the cup. I wanted to be near the papers while I read the news, not because I feared their disappearance, but because I liked the way they grounded the table. The daily report arrived at noon again, a fence panel stacked by the drive, a white temporary sign that read, "Authorized personnel only," a line of orange cones like a trail of bright breadcrumbs. Half an hour later, my phone lit with a number I did not recognize. I answered because sometimes respect takes the form of hearing the next sentence. It was Chloe. Her voice was raw in a way I had not heard before. "Zaria," she said, "I want to understand. I know the papers say what they say. I know what is happening. I just need to hear you tell me that you meant this." I waited before I spoke so that my words would be clean. I did. "You are selling the land," she said, as if naming the action might turn it into a question. "You are selling the ground our house is on." "I am selling what is mine," I answered. "I am selling what I gave freely and what was treated like a debt I owed." She breathed in and out audibly. "We did not mean to hurt you. You did not mean to see me," I said. Silence. Then a small sound, like a glass set on a counter too carefully. "We can fix this," she said. "We can buy it. We can refinance. We can talk to your lawyer." "The time for that was the year you decided I belonged behind a hedge," I said, not cruelly. "The time for that was the day the first stake went into my lavender." A long pause. Then a small voice I almost did not recognize. "I am sorry." "I believe you," I said. "I hope you will find a place where your future can grow without needing to uproot the past." She ended the call without a goodbye. I set the phone down and felt a kind of exhaustion that did not ask for sleep. I stood and filled a glass with water and drank it slowly. My hands shook once and then steadied. I have learned to trust the tremor that leaves. Near dusk, the developer sent a final pre-stage report. A photo of the gate with a fresh padlock. A photo of the field office, a tidy white box with a small window. A photo of the survey markings in chalk across the grass, like the start of a strange game. The note said cruise at 8, security on site, utility check confirmed. I stepped onto the balcony and watched the western sky turn the color of ripe fruit. The city drew its lights up from the sidewalks to the roofs. I breathed in until my ribs pressed against my dress and then let the air out with care. Below me, a man on a bench took off his hat and held it in both hands as if the sky were a church. I closed my eyes for a moment and thanked whatever remembers us when we forget ourselves. When I opened them, the plant in the pot had put out a new leaf, no bigger than a fingernail. It glowed like a small idea that intended to become a plan. I went inside and set an alarm I would not need. I straightened the papers on the table and checked the pen beside them as if I might have something left to sign. I put the kettle on and then turned it off before it sang. I chose sleep instead of ceremony. The last thought I had before the room went dark was not of the house or the stakes or the letter on the door. It was of the first lavender I ever planted on that land many years ago, and how it took root easily, as if it knew exactly where it was in the world. The next thought was of the balcony pot and the small leaf that had appeared with the same certainty. The plants were telling the same story in two languages. I felt grateful that I could still read both. The morning arrived without subtlety. 8 o'clock is a blunt hour when it carries machines. I stood at the apartment window with a cup cooling between my hands and the noon report inbox already open, though noon was far away. The field manager had sent a short text at 7:40, crew on site, security present, utilities clear, lifting marigolds now. I wrote back 2 words, thank you. At 8:01, the first email landed early, as if urgency had learned to type. 5 photographs nested in the message like birds lined on a wire. In the first, the gate stood open with a guard in a bright vest holding a clipboard. In the second, 2 workers knelt at the back fence, lifting the marigolds with a careful spade, the roots held in a cradle of soil. The third showed the small excavator nosing forward like a curious animal. The fourth caught the porch of the main house, with its pale steps washed clean by last night's rain. The fifth held Liam and Chloe in the frame without meaning to. They stood on the walkway with faces tipped toward the crew chief. His hand pointed toward the hedge. His mouth formed the shape of a courtesy that had no room left to grow. I set the phone down and pressed both fists against my ribs until my breath remembered what to do. The next call came from the site security officer. His voice had the patient timbre of someone who has learned to keep situations a few degrees cooler than they wish to be. Mrs. Hawkins, we have explained the schedule and the paperwork to the residents. There was some distress. We are keeping the road clear. The crew is proceeding with staging and will start the fence removal on the west side. Thank you, I said. If they ask to salvage personal belongings, give them as much time as the schedule allows. Please be kind if you can. We will do our best, he said, and I believed him. I made tea and did not drink it. I paced the room without putting more steps on the floor than I needed. I sat in the chair by the balcony door and watched the mint plant's newest leaf open a fraction more. There is a speed to growth that refuses instruction. Just before 9, the phone trembled with a call I could not answer. Liam. Mom, he said. His voice was rough, as if he had swallowed rain. They are here. There are trucks. They have papers. I do not understand. You do, I said gently. You do now. We can fix it, he insisted. The old boyish pitch in his tone hurt me in an unexpected place. We can talk to them. We can buy the land. We can stop this. The time to fix it has passed, I said. The time to understand is here. Silence. I heard steps. I heard an engine idle. I heard a woman's voice say something like, not that side, not the yard, go slow. Chloe wants to speak to you, he said. No, I answered. Not today. She is crying, he said. A world of complicated regret balled itself into that sentence. I hope she will one day cry for the right reasons, I said, not unkindly. But I am not that reason anymore. Mom, he whispered, please. You will be safe, I said. No one will harm you. You will take what matters. You will leave what does not. And then you will begin again in a place that does not ask you to forget who built your ground. He breathed. Once, twice, a sound like a wave that could not decide whether to break. I am sorry, he said. I know, I answered. So am I. We ended the call without goodbye. Some words are too small for certain doors. The noon report arrived on time, like a bell. The first photo showed the back fence taken down in long, neat panels. The second showed the marigolds tucked into a temporary bed in the far corner, leaves flattened but unbroken. The third showed a pile of patio stones, stacked with a grace that made me think of the day Liam and I had carried stones along that same path one at a time. The fourth captured a moment I would not have believed if a camera had not gently insisted. Chloe stood barefoot on the lawn in a robe, hair pulled back without its usual precision, holding a cardboard box as if a heartbeat lived inside it. She stared at the excavator, as if her eyes alone could unbuild it. In the background, the security officer looked at her with the human level of pity he could afford, and then looked away so that his duty could continue to be duty. I closed my eyes and saw the scene inside my eyelids brighter than on the glass. My body did a small shake, and then settled like earth after a shovel turns it. I ate a slice of bread with honey. I drank the tea that had gone cool. I stood at the sink and let water run over my hands until they stopped trying to clench. I thanked them for all the years they had learned how to let go. The second wave of photos came just after 2. The machines had taken the first bite out of the guest cottage foundation that had never learned to be more than an outline. Concrete crumbled with a humility that materials seldom show when they think they are permanent. The crew had placed plastic over the garden beds to shield them from dust as much as work allows. This small kindness brought me an unreasonable measure of relief. In one frame, Liam stood near the porch with his laptop clutched against his chest, the way a child holds a toy in a fire drill. A neighbor hovered at the property line, pretending to fetch his mail for the 3rd time. A woman from the next street pressed her hand to her mouth as if shock were a polite thing that needed a gesture. At 3, the phone rang again. Not Liam, a number from the county. A woman with a gentle authority informed me that a complaint had been lodged by the residents concerning documentation. She said they had reviewed the records and confirmed the chain of title. She said the demolition schedule met all ordinances. She said if the residents wished to pursue civil remedies, they were of course free to do so. She said this with the kind of weariness that proves the sentence has been used before and will be used again. I thanked her for the call and for the care she took to say the truth softly. The last report of the day arrived when the light began its slide toward evening. The back half of the roof had been removed in panels. The skeleton of the house showed itself cleanly to the sky. Empty rooms opened like mouths. I could see the shape of the office where the apple tree once stood, glass gone, studs showing their temporary honesty. I could see the kitchen where I had rolled out dough on the old counter before it was replaced. I could see the corridor where the sign had once been placed to face my door. I stood very still and felt the strange gratitude that comes when a story finally stops pretending to be another kind. I slept little that night. I did not need sleep. I needed to be awake for this, not to witness pain, to witness truth. The city held me like a calm friend who knows when to say nothing. The mint plant put forth another leaf in the dark, as if it were rewriting a small page on my behalf. Just before dawn, I wrote a letter I would not send for some time. I wrote it to my son on paper that smelled faintly of dust and new ink. I told him who he had been as a child when he tried to plant beans in a shoebox and clapped when one sprout broke through. I told him who he could still be. I told him anger is a kind of grief, and grief is a kind of love that met a wall. I folded the letter and placed it with the deeds, as if it were a document that could one day be petitioned for relief. Morning rose. The machines would return. I placed my palms on the table. I felt the wood. I said my name out loud to the room so that the day would know who it was dealing with. Zaria Hawkins. Present. The second day began with a sound like an old promise being broken cleanly in 2. The machines eased back into their places. Crew faces had the resolved calm of people who have already done the hard work of accepting the task in front of them. The field office door opened and closed with a neat click. A thermos lid turned. A stapler made its precise bite on a clipboard. Work speaks in small noises when it is sure of itself. The 9 o'clock photos showed the house with a side cut open to the air like a dollhouse that forgot to be cute. Cabinets still hanging. A white bowl on a counter that had somehow remained in place. A chair tipped sideways as if someone had gotten up too quickly and never returned. The shot caught the entry to the corridor, where family pictures used to hang before they were replaced with framed prints that matched the color of the couch. People underestimate the stability of walls. They learn about it in days like this. At 10, a message from the field manager. Residents have requested an additional hour to remove items from upper bedroom. Approved. Security escort provided. No incident. I wrote back, "Thank you for granting that." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji that managed to be both human and professional. At 11, a new message. Small delay due to neighbor intervention. Resolved. Proceeding. When the noon report arrived, it came with a video attachment. I held the phone, and for the first time since this began, I pressed play. The image showed the excavator arm rising and then coming down on the rear corner of the roof. The beam cracked, not with a roar but with a sound like a shout muffled by cloth. Dust rose and drifted, and the arm lifted and fell again with the accuracy of repetition. In the left of the frame, two figures watched, close together. The security officer stood a step behind them, a courteous sentry. The camera panned slightly, and the lake dazzled for a moment, as if to remind everyone that beauty is indifferent. I watched the clip twice and then closed my eyes. I expected tears. They did not come. What arrived instead was a strange, full, clean breath that filled the lungs I had been using at only half capacity for years. I exhaled and felt my shoulders sit lower on my body, as if bones themselves had exhaled. Around 1, Liam called again. I answered. "They started on the roof," he said. He sounded hoarse. "They said the rest will go faster once the structure yields." "It always does," I said. He did not speak for a few seconds. I could hear the light wind there, and the dull waiting of people who cannot quite stand still. Then he said, "Mom, I found the curtain you embroidered. It was in a box in the attic. I do not know how it got there." I sat down because the room tilted a degree I did not anticipate. "Keep it," I said, "or give it to someone who understands why hands make things." He tried to laugh, and could not. "I am sorry," he said again, as if the words might change shape with repetition. "When you are ready," I said, "write down what you are sorry for. Not for my sake, for yours. Accuracy is the first mercy we give ourselves." He said he would. I believed him a little. We ended the call, and I put my face in my hands and let 2 breaths pass through the small cave I made with my fingers. I am not a woman who prays often, but I said a sentence that could qualify. Let him learn. At 2, the crew began the front facade. A photo showed the cut, like a smile that never belonged to the house, but had been painted on for company. The excavator arm pressed and wood gave, and a cross-section of rooms revealed stripes of paint from different years. Beige, then ocean blue, then the clean white of Chloe's brief reign. Layers of a life recorded without asking permission. Neighbors gathered like a congregation that needed something to watch to feel like a group. A man filmed with his phone from the sidewalk for longer than anyone would later admit. A woman wiped her cheeks and shook her head and said to no one at all that it was a shame. The security officer stood with his hands at his waist, feet planted, a man drawing a border with his body so that people did not need to look at a map to know where they must not go. By late afternoon, the house was almost a diagram. The rooms signaled to the sky until the sky lost interest and turned a deeper color. The crew pulled back for the day the way tides do. A last photo showed the marigolds resting in their temporary bed, like survivors who had not yet processed what they had survived. The note read, "Proceeding to interior demo tomorrow, pool schedule Thursday." The word pool pricked something in me. The pool had been Liam's dream and Chloe's pride, the glossy surface that held a different version of themselves for visitors to admire. I imagined the emptying and the shattering of the hard blue shell and the pile of fragments carted away like bright bones. I sat with that image until it turned from satisfaction into something quieter and more adult. Not revenge, completion. Evening descended like a sensible curtain. I ate soup. I wrote 3 postcards that I would never mail. One to my husband, one to my younger self, one to a woman I had never met but had always liked from novels. I told each of them that I was learning the cost of being gentle in the wrong rooms, and I was paying it forward and then closing the account. The 3rd day opened clean and fast. The noon report showed the living room removed down to joists that looked like the ribs of a quiet creature. The kitchen's tile lay in a crate. The refrigerator had learned to be modest. The field manager wrote, "Residents removed remaining belongings early. No contact since. Work continues on schedule. At 2, a sound traveled across the distance between their lawn and my chest. It was the clean snap of tile and the hollow ring of a shell giving way. The pool began to empty. There are many kinds of silence. The silence of water leaving a place designed to hold it is the one that feels most like a truth you finally speak to yourself. I stood on the balcony with my hand on the doorframe and watched a cloud reshape itself as the wind took a decision. I did not look at my phone until it chirped. A photo. The pool half drained, the blue turned to dull chalk, a thin ladder leaning against a wall that had never been meant to be touched. A second photo. The jackhammer breaking the first plate. The caption was a single word. Progress. I smiled because sometimes even the practical people allow poetry. That evening, Liam came to the city. He did not say he was coming. He called from the sidewalk. "I am downstairs," he said. I considered saying no. I considered sending him away with a text from a future we had not yet earned. Instead, I said, "Come up, because sometimes mercy must stretch." He stood in the doorway of the apartment with rain in his hair, and a look I recognized from the first time he ever told me the truth after breaking something he loved. He stepped inside, saw the plants on the balcony, and let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob that did not want to embarrass itself. We sat. He looked at his hands. He looked at me. "I thought the house would save us," he said. "I thought the house meant we were grown and real and impossible to move." "Houses do not save people," I said. "People save people. Land remembers who tended it." "I did not remember you," he said, and the sentence put both of us in a room where humility could be a chair. "You remembered me when you were 10, I said. "You can remember me again." He nodded, slow. He told me about the day the stakes went in and how he had felt a wrongness he did not name. He told me about the night Chloe said the word assisted and how the word had sounded like a door closing on something he loved but could not identify. He told me about the way he had started speaking in other people's sentences because the world rewarded him when he did. We said very little about blame. Blame is a dessert that makes you hungrier. We spoke about responsibility instead. Responsibility turns light on in rooms you can clean. He stood to leave and paused at the balcony. He touched the mint gently, the way a person strokes a cat that is not theirs. He looked at me. "Thank you for doing what I could not imagine," he said, "even if I will hate the pictures for a while." "You do not have to like a surgery for it to save you," I said. He managed a smile that held only itself, and then he was gone. The hallway swallowed his steps. The city offered me again the sound of its page turning. The next morning the final wall fell. The noon report showed a field of boards and the stubborn square of the chimney still insisting on its old purpose. By evening, the chimney had agreed to a new idea and lay down in orderly pieces. The last photo showed an empty rectangle of earth, a map of what had been. A page primed for a different story. I placed the phone on the table and rested my hands on either side of it, palms down, grounding wood with skin. I said nothing for a long time. Then, I spoke one sentence to the room, to the plants, to the evening light, to the woman I had been and the one I had become. "We are done here." The city answered with a small wind. The mint lifted its newest leaf like a hand. The future waited with ordinary patience a few inches beyond the balcony rail. I breathed and felt the breath travel farther than it had in years. Tomorrow would not bring a house or a fence or a pool. It would bring a morning that did not need to remember any of those things in order to be true. The morning after the last wall fell arrived with a weightless kind of light, the kind that slips through curtains without asking. I woke before the city shook itself awake and lay still long enough to hear the small things. Pipes settling. A pigeon correcting its landing on the sill. Leaves on the balcony plant rubbing together with the sound of paper being turned with care. I said my name to the ceiling and felt the word land. It did not echo. I brewed mint tea and carried it to the balcony. The pot had pushed out 2 new leaves overnight, brave and tender, the color of promises that know they will be kept. A bus sighed at the corner. The baker, 2 streets over, pulled his shades up with a rattle of metal. A runner passed below, feet tapping the pavement in clean sentences. The world knew what to do with itself. I smiled at the relief of being held by a day that did not need me to explain it. The noon report arrived as the church bells across the square finished their last note. The photo showed an empty foundation and a temporary fence, with a small sign that said, "Future Site," with a developer logo that looked like a river. In the corner of the frame sat a square of earth that was darker than the rest. The caption simply read, "Marigolds relocated." I enlarged the photo and saw them there, a little stunned, a little ragged, but upright. I wrote back 2 words. "You tried." The field manager answered with a heart that felt like a hand pressed to a forearm before parting. I put the phone down and walked to the cupboard. I pulled out a box that held the few letters of my life I had carried from place to place. I added the printed copies of filings and notices and the final accounting from the firm. I slid the letter I had written to Liam 2 nights earlier into the envelope and sealed it without rereading. The act of closing is its own kind of reading. I addressed it to his apartment in the city and left it near the door so I would not forget on my way out. I spent the afternoon finding my new map. There is a ritual to entering a life that fits. You learn the names of the buildings that anchor the corners of your walks. You discover which store puts the nicer lemons near the front and which cafe pours confidence into their cups. You learn to time the light at the crossing near the library. If you are not in the mood to run, I walked the square, the river path, the quiet street that ends in a small park where the benches remember the names of couples who are no longer together. A black dog decided my hand was an old friend. I let it be true for us both. In the park, I found a notice for a community garden 3 blocks away. "Volunteers welcome," it said, in tidy letters that left room for your own pen to add your name. Saturday mornings, bring gloves, bring patience. I tore one of the tabs with the email and folded it into my pocket like a bird folded for flight. On the way home, I stopped at a corner shop that sells odd things exactly no one needs and exactly everyone buys when they see them. I chose a plain clay pot and a small sack of soil and 2 wooden markers. At the register, the clerk asked what I planned to plant. I said maybe basil for boldness and thyme for truth. He said I had the face of a woman who makes things live. I accepted the compliment as if he had migrated it from the sky. Back at the apartment, I checked my inbox. A small email from Edward waited with the subject line "just checking." He wrote that the final transfer would post the following day, that the county records now showed the parcel under the developer's name, that the clerk had asked after me with uncommon warmth, that the city had greeted our efficiency with quiet approval. He asked if I needed anything. I wrote back and told him the thing I needed I already had, which was a room in which my breath belonged to me. Evening laid its soft hand on the buildings. I cooked a simple meal, stirred with measured circles, salted with attention, sat at the small table, and ate slowly. The phone vibrated once. A message from Liam. He had read my letter. He wrote a reply that looked like a field after rain. He did not ask me to undo anything. He did not ask me to forget anything. He asked only whether I might meet him one morning by the river to walk without talking much. I wrote yes, and offered a day that left both of us time to gather whatever our voices would later need. I slept early and deeply. My dreams were not words. They were textures, warm soil, clean water, wood under a hand that meant to build for shelter and not for show. Morning found me already ready for it. The first Saturday, I carried the clay pot and the soil and my gloves to the community garden. The lot sat behind a red brick building and opened like a smile when you stepped through the gate. Some plots were wild on purpose. Some were for children and their ideas about scale. Some were precise and quiet. A woman with gray hair tucked behind one ear stood near a table with sign and sheets and a jar of pencils. She introduced herself as Nora. Her voice was clear, her eyes kind, her posture free of hurry. I said my name, and it felt like placing a flower in a frame. She smiled and said she was glad I had found them. She pointed toward an empty bed near the fence and said it had been waiting. I ran my fingers through the soil and felt its patient roughness take my fingerprints for a moment before forgetting them. I planted basil in the corner and thyme along the rim and pressed each root down with the firm, tender push that means both welcome and stand up. The sun moved above us in its practical way. The voices of other volunteers wove around me in a light braid. I looked up to see a boy explaining to his sister why worms are friends. I felt the exact measure of peace arrive and take a chair. When I finished, Nora handed me a small terracotta marker and a stub of pencil. I wrote Zaria in the small, neat letters my hands have never forgotten. I stuck the marker in the soil and stepped back. Naming something does not make it yours. Tending it does. But sometimes, a small sign helps the heart remember what it is already doing. On the way home, I bought a handful of fresh lavender from a vendor who arranged his bundles like choir rows. He wrapped them in paper and asked what room they would sing in. I said, "Every room." He laughed and said I had expensive intentions. He gave me an extra stem as a blessing. At the apartment, I set the lavender in a glass, and the room changed shape around it, the way rooms do when they are given a center. I wrote to the field manager to thank her again for saving what could be saved. She replied within the hour with a photo of the marigolds that had lifted their heads, orange and brave. Under the photo, she had written your note about kindness, helped the crew. I read the line twice. I let it sit somewhere near my ribs. A week later, the developer sent the last series of images, marked as final pass. The ground was graded, the fence was tidy, the rectangle of earth looked ready to imagine another life. I did not study the pictures. I looked once, then placed them in the folder with the other facts. Not because I was avoiding feeling, but because feeling had shifted into something still and true and did not require more proof. I walked more that week. I watched the city discover its leaves and watched people whose days were heavier still find ways to carry them with humor. In the square, a cellist sat up near the fountain and pulled honest music out of wood and string. I stood until his bow wanted rest and dropped a few bills in his open case. He nodded. I nodded back. We had both done our work. The morning I met Liam, the river held a wide band of light as if it were wearing a sash. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his face clean of strategies. We walked, we talked a little. He told me they had found a small apartment in a building with a laundry room that required quarters and a porch that faced a tree. He said Chloe was quiet, and then louder, and then quiet again. He said he had started writing a list of things he wanted to be good at that did not require other people to be small. I told him about the garden, and Nora and the idea of a row of zinnias, because sometimes color is medicine. I told him about the cellist, and the vendor with the choir of lavender, and the way basil throws its scent at you as soon as you commit to watering it. We paused on the bridge where the wind corrects the posture of even the proudest walkers. He looked at me the way he had when he was 10, and about to ask for something he hoped he deserved. "Will you come see us when we are settled?" he said. "Yes," I answered, "when the rooms have learned their uses, and your voices have learned their softer shapes." He nodded, and we stood without speaking until the light changed, and the spell of people waiting near the curb asked us to move. We parted with a small touch of hands. No absolution, no demand, just a contact that allowed the next step. I watched him go and felt hope do its careful work inside me. Not a fire, not a drum, just a lamp placed at the foot of a bed to welcome dark without fearing it. That night, the apartment seemed larger. I watered the mint and the rosemary and wrote the names of the new plants on 2 more markers. I lit a candle, not to mourn, but to honor. I opened the window and let the air carry the faint pain of sirens and the strong comfort of people talking just below laughter. I slept with my hand open on the blanket, like a sign to my body that nothing needed gripping now. In the dream that found me near dawn, I walked through a field of lavender that went on beyond the edge of the frame. At the horizon stood a house without walls, a house made only of roof and pillars and shade. My husband sat there with his elbows on his knees, grinning the smile that had survived every storm, and he did not speak, because I did not need him to. I woke with the flavor of the field still in my mouth, and the knowledge that I had arrived in a version of my life that would not require apology. I brewed tea. I stood at the window. I watched morning distribute itself like a fair inheritance. The future looked ordinary in the most beautiful way. I was ready to be loyal to it. The city keeps time with small instruments. A mail cart squeaks. A cafe doorbell goes tinned and then quiet. An elevator opens and closes like the breath of a polite animal. In the weeks that followed, I learned the score and found my part. I taught a class once a week at a senior center 2 blocks away because a flyer had asked for someone to show people how to grow 3 herbs in a window box and keep them alive without fuss. I wrote my name on the clipboard under the word volunteer and felt my shoulders settle in a way that chairs attempt and do not always achieve. The first class brought 8 people and a 9th who came late and had brought only curiosity. We planted basil and mint and thyme. We named the qualities of each leaf as if we were choosing characters for a play. One woman in a blue cardigan told me she had not planted anything since she was a girl in a country far from here, and that her hands seemed to remember which parts of the root to press, which to leave unbothered. A man with kind eyebrows asked if talking to plants helps. I told him I had never met a living thing that did not do better when spoken to with respect. The room laughed and then quieted, and the sound felt like water finding its level. Between classes, I wrote small notes to myself and left them in places I would accidentally discover. A drawer near the stove now holds a card that says, "Kindness does not require permission." The pocket of my coat carries a folded line that says, "Insist on gentleness where you can, and insist on boundaries where you must." The mirror has nothing on it, because some faces deserve a clear day. The developer sent a final message on a Friday afternoon with a professional flourish. "Site closed for now," it read. "Future plans pending. Thank you for your cooperation." Attached was a photo of the cleared ground under a sky so indifferent you could almost laugh. In the far corner, you could just see the marigolds holding on like a short choir that refuses to leave the stage after the curtain has fallen. I sent the field manager a note that said, if they ever needed a garden consult for the new build, I would consider it for a fee payable in plants. She wrote back that she would bring me a tray of seedlings as soon as the nursery returned her calls. We closed our exchange with the kind of friendly formality that allows breath on both sides. On a Sunday afternoon, when the air smelled like warm stone and the river had learned a new way to glitter, I met Liam and Chloe at a small cafe near their new building. The porch faced a sycamore that had made its own decisions for decades and had done well. Chloe's hands were restless at first and then still. She did not reach for a speech. She said she was sorry again, quieter, with less drama and more weight. I said I heard her. I asked about the new place. She told me about a corner where the light surprises them every evening, and a neighbor who plays piano 1 hour a day exactly, and a grocery that slices their bread in a way she finds pleasing. She laughed once, the real kind, and I saw the person she might be when the room is right. Liam asked about the community garden. I told him about Nora and the boy who champions worms and the row of zinnias that is beginning to look like a parade. I told him basil grows bold when you snip it without pity. I told him time likes to be forgotten for a day. He grinned, in spite of the ache that will be with him for a while. He asked if he could bring a small plant to my balcony as a treaty. I said treaties work best when they are not called that. Bring it anyway. They walked me back through streets that have learned their feet. At the corner we stood for an extra minute, as if that were interest charged on a debt we had chosen not to incur. We parted without fear. It is astonishing what a life can bear once you stop asking it to hold what never fit. In the months that followed, I found a rhythm that respected my age and defied the narrowness others had presumed for it. Mornings for tea and letters and modest plans. Midday for walks and markets, and the class that had grown to 12 and then to 15, with the addition of a man who insists rosemary is a way of life. Afternoons for reading and the quiet discipline of not filling every hour. Evenings for music if the square offered it, and for silence if it did not. My balcony became a green syllable over the street. The mint kept expanding its case until I learned to harvest with confidence. The basil taught patience and surrender in alternating lessons. The thyme stood there like a small philosopher who knows the future but does not boast. Now and then, the law will send a letter to remind you it remembers you. Copies of final filings, tax confirmations, a survey that shows a line you could walk if you knew which way to face. I filed them in the box with the others. Sometimes at night, I put the box on the table and rest my hand on it for a minute, because the weight of earned order can soothe a body that has carried too much improvisation. One late afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened, a courier stood there with a shallow tray covered by a cloth. He handed it to me with the solemnity of a ceremony we had forgotten to schedule. "From the field," the card said. "As promised." I lifted the cloth. A dozen small transplants looked up at me, each with its own attempt at courage. Lavender, yes, also yarrow. And one thin stem that would be echinacea if it survived its doubts. Dirt crumbled onto my shoes. I laughed and let it stay there while I arranged the tray on the table, like a guest who deserved an introduction. I wrote a note of thanks and sent it before I watered them. Gratitude goes out before the drink. I repotted the plants at dusk. The sky went the color of a bruise healing. Music floated up from a flat across the way, where someone was learning the same 3 chords everyone learns before they learn anything else. I worked without hurry, pressing soil around each root with a gesture I had inherited from women I never met. When I finished, the balcony looked less like a boundary and more like a small country with its own kind laws. As summer leaned toward its high note, I took the train one morning back toward the lake. Not to see the sight, not to stand on the road and measure a loss. I went to a public trail that runs near the water a few miles away, a place where no house had ever asked me to prove myself. The air smelled like pine and wet rock. Dragonflies stitched quick lines over the creek. I walked until my breath matched the easy discipline of the path. At a bend in the trail, an older couple had spread a blanket. They offered me a peach without preamble. I sat for a minute and ate it over my palm and watched the juice gather and fall and listened to the water make a sound that could be mistaken for talking if you needed a friend. I thanked them and stood and kept walking. The sky had arranged clouds like punctuation, commas, and one period. I felt the sentence of my life settle into grammar. On the ride home, I wrote in a small notebook I keep for moments that resist photographs. I wrote that forgiveness is not a permission slip you hand to someone else. It is a set of clean sheets you put on your own bed. I wrote that dignity is a daily practice and not the trophy people think it is. I wrote that land and bodies both remember and that this is not a curse. It is a ledger. Pay it honest and it will treat you fair. The last email from the developer came in early autumn. The subject said thank you, and the body said, we have begun designs for a small public path along the waterline that will keep a narrow ribbon of the shore open for walkers. No one asked them for that. They had their reasons to try kindness. I chose to accept the result and not interrogate the impulse. They attached a rendering with trees that looked a little too pleased with themselves, as trees in renderings always do. I decided I would walk that path when it arrived, and I would let the trees be proud in peace. On the first cool night, I placed a cup of tea on the window ledge and wrote a final letter to the woman I had been the winter. I began to believe shrinking would save my family. I told her she had done what she knew. I told her the bill had been high, but the purchase had not been foolish. I told her we had found a way to pay it without interest for the rest of our life. Then I thanked her for her stubborn heart and promised to keep it busy with better work. I keep the lavender by the bed now. It wears the room like a crown without arrogance. Some evenings I crush a sprig between my fingers and breathe the simple medicine. I do not think of the house. I do not think of the pool. I think of the row of stones I laid with a small boy who believed me when I said the path would always lead him home. He is a man now, finding a better road. In time, he will build a place that does not require anyone he loves to become smaller to fit. That will be his restoration. Mine is already here. On clear mornings, the city air tastes like metal and sunshine. On rainy ones, it tastes like patience. I am learning to love both. I walk to the garden and kneel and press my hands into the ground and let it print me again. I return to my kitchen and fold towels that smell like line-dried days, even though they were not. I listen for the quiet ring that silver makes against porcelain, and when I hear it in memory, I smile, because that was the sound of a start, not an ending. People think revenge is a trumpet. I have discovered it is a door you choose not to close on yourself. What I wanted was not their sorrow. What I wanted was my house within my ribs returned to me. I have it now. It is furnished with a bed that rests, a table that holds, a window that opens without sticking. In the morning I say my name to the light, and the light says it back in ordinary syllables that feel like a blessing. Silence did not win for me. I did. Silence was the room where I laid out the pieces and chose what to keep. When I finally spoke, the day listened. When I stopped speaking, the day stayed. I am here. I tend what grows. I forgive what I can and guard what I must. I drink mint tea and watch the leaf that arrives without asking permission, and I welcome it with both hands.